Did you hear that? Sheep again. Jesus calls us sheep again. Metaphorically speaking, of course. And Jesus did the same in last week's gospel where Father Bob Gross told us. Jesus asked the disciple Peter to follow him into a new relationship with him and into a new ministry. The ministry of feeding and caring for Jesus' sheep. And today, Jesus tells us who his sheep are. His sheep are those who hear his voice and follow him because he is the good shepherd. But why sheep? Of all the animals to choose from, why sheep? Because they're kind of cute and cuddly, like in those Hallmark greeting cards and movies Father Tom mentioned? Maybe. But I'm thinking that isn't anywhere near what anybody in Jesus' time would have thought about sheep. So the question is, what are real sheep like? Well, I don't really know, so I had to go look it up on Google and in a book, and those sources told me. Sheep were the most important domestic animals in the Near East at that time. Sheep were valued because sheep provided sustenance. They provided meat, milk, and wool for warmth on those cold winter days. And here's the difference. Unlike the sheep today, the sheep in the time of Jesus were not fenced in. And because there were no walls or barriers to protect them from predators, those sheep were totally dependent on a good shepherd. They were totally dependent on a good shepherd for their very life. And then I also learned that sheep were dirty, they stunk like crazy, they were, quote, singularly dumb, prone to wandering off, falling off cliffs, getting stuck, getting lost, and then, as my dear mother would have said, they couldn't find their way back to the sheepfold if it was right in front of their nose. She was probably right. Maybe she was talking about me. Anyway, those sheep needed supervision, 24/7 supervision, and a really, truly good shepherd who truly and reliably cared for them and fed them. It's a shepherd like that that builds such a relationship, such a reliable relationship of trust, that the sheep not only know the shepherd's voice, the sheep can pick it out from all those other competing and enticing voices, and then those sheep run to the safety of that voice and they follow it. So here's my puzzler. If those singularly dumb, stinky, four-legged sheep who can't find their way out of a paper bag, if they're smart enough and trusting enough to hear, know, and follow their good shepherd's voice, what about us? The two-legged sheep in Jesus' flock. Are we smart enough to know and trust the voice of Jesus, our good shepherd, when we hear it? But then again, maybe it doesn't have anything to do with smarts. Maybe it is more about being willing and able, willing to pick out that voice of Jesus and that cacophony of competing voices. And we hear those voices on TV, read it on the social media, or we hear those voices at work, at play, at school, even here at church. I've heard those enticing voices, and much to my dismay, I have followed them. Maybe we at all times have followed them. Not at all times, but at one time or another. Maybe I was just talking about myself. Anyway, sheep. We are not like those sheep, because when we are lost, we are neither hopeless or helpless. We can choose to turn to Jesus and follow him. And how do we do that? We follow him by loving our Lord our God and putting our God first in our heart, mind, and soul, and then loving our neighbor and ourselves. And when we do that, that is when I believe we can begin to hear the voice of Jesus, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. And then we can more clearly hear those deceptive voices for what they truly are. You know, those deceptive voices that evoke fear of others, not love, that evoke violence, exclusion, abuse, not love. Words that evoke bullying, indifference, addiction, exploitation, despair, hate, not love. I believe that when we put the love of God first and not ourselves first, we will then know what those deceptive voices are and that they are not the voice of Jesus. And here is another thing for which I am grateful. Because no matter how often we wander off, we get stuck, or whatever, we can always trust Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Because Jesus, the Good Shepherd, will never abandon us, avoid us, or run from us. Jesus will continue to call, and all we have to do is listen and be willing to hear his voice with our heart, soul, and mind. And we can count on Jesus. Why? We can count on Jesus because the way of the Good Shepherd is the way of living into relationships that are about love, about compassion, forgiveness, grace, and mercy. Not just for a few of us, but for all of us. Amen.
Amen.